In the past, schemes that have used common practice tests for additionality have stipulated thresholds without much empirical analysis or evidence. But the common practice framework that has been developed by ABARES, the threshold is proposed, have been supported by research using mathematical modeling and quantitative analysis of real-world data. I'll talk more about our common practice determination approach in the next little while. The common practice assessment framework and the adoption thresholds that we have developed are broadly based on diffusion of innovation theory. According to this theory, the diffusion path of a new technology or practice typically follows a S-shaped curve. As you can see here, in the early stage, the uptake of an innovation is slow. As the diffusion proceeds over time, the rate of adoption increases, typically with a transition point corresponding to a maximum increase in the rate of diffusion. The point of maximum uptake acceleration is the takeoff point when early adopters start building on the experience of innovators. Beyond the takeoff point, the activity is likely to become widespread and may not require policy incentives. The takeoff point is an effective indicator or threshold for a common practice assessment for additionality. A practice should only be credited due to the introduction of the CFI. It is therefore important to identify and understand the impact of other factors for adoption. Practices that have moved from early adoption to pervasive diffusion before the CFI clearly have a number of benefits, such as productivity gains, that make this practice attractive and therefore are most likely to be adopted under a business-as-usual scenario. ABARES has set out to explore how to determine the takeoff point for the common practice framework, whether this point could be predicted with small data sample. ABARES has also explored whether there are other points that can be used as potential threshold for additionality test. Our analysis has found that the takeoff point is not easy to predict, even more difficult with limited survey data. However, when analyzing the takeoff points for a number of different diffusion curves, the takeoff point almost always occurred below the 20% adoption rate. As such, the 20%, which is the upper bound of the takeoff point, is proposed to be one of the thresholds for ABARES framework. It is particularly useful when the real-world data on activity and practice diffusion are limited. Further analysis has also suggested that this uptake threshold for common practice determination can be adjusted according to the size of the potential adopters. We propose that, if necessary, practice thresholds be adjusted through expert opinion and additional research. Our common practice assessment framework will be informed by Australian Bureau of Statistics Land Management Practice Survey. This is fit for purpose, a customized survey, which will take place once in 2 years, as well as data and other information from other sources. The empirical literature that we have reviewed also suggests that the takeoff point tends to occur beyond 2.5% adoption rate. In view of the above, based on our research and the consultation with Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry colleagues and Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency, and also drawing on from literature on various schemes and innovation literature, we have proposed this particular framework. Let me explain how it works. The framework operates in 3 distinct streams of assessment. If the number of adopters of a particular practice is below 2.5% of the target population, it is likely that the practices are in the invention or innovation phase, and that the transition to widespread adoption is yet to occur. Therefore, these practices could be considered additional. And this is stream 1 assessment in our framework. Whether this threshold remains at 2.5% or set higher is, of course, a subject of further research and policy deliberation. Destruction of methane from piggeries could have been one good example of stream 1 assessment. If, however, the level of adoption is above a threshold of 20% of the target population, practices could be considered non-additional. This is stream 3 assessment in our framework. If the level of adoption of a practice falls between 2.5 and 20% of the target population, we propose further analysis to determine the activity-specific common practice threshold. Once analyzed, the practice can be considered either additional or non-additional. This is stream 2 assessment. The framework could operate with fit-for-purpose ABS survey and the data from other sources. It can be applied to a particular spatial scale. The regional scale at which each common practice threshold test will occur will depend on the industry and the practice. Over time, practices are likely to progress along certain adoption pathways and will need to be reassessed periodically. So what is next for our research and way forward? We are refining this common practice framework. Technical papers outlining the framework and detailing the analysis underpinning the framework will soon be publicly released. Meanwhile, ABS, State Bureau of Statistics, will be undertaking fit-for-purpose biennial survey. ABS will be using the customized ABS data and data from other sources and develop and maintain a common practice database for additionality assessment. We expect to use framework for assessing additionality of the identified CFI offset projects for inclusion in the positive list. Thank you.